Hi, everyone. Welcome, and thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Julie Tuff, and I'm a program manager of the Science Panel for the Amazon, and I will be moderating today's session. We are so excited to be launching our new Science Across Generations dialogue series with our first session on sustainable development in the Amazon. Next slide, Daniel. Before we dive into today's discussions, I would like to remind everyone that we do have interpretation available in English, Spanish, and Portuguese. The interpretation can be turned on by clicking on the globe icon at the bottom of your screen and selecting the language of your choice. Please note that resources will be shared by our team in the chat box throughout the webinar, and we also invite you to submit any questions that you may have in the Q&A box for the Q&A session that we will have at the end of the session. Questions can be submitted in English, Spanish, or Portuguese. Next slide. To get started, I will be sharing some background information about the Science Panel for the Amazon, who we are, and what brings us here today. The Science Panel for the Amazon, or SPA, is the world's first regional high-level science initiative dedicated to the Amazon. The SPA was established in September 2019, inspired by the Leticia Pact. The SPA is convened under the auspices of the Sustainable Development Solutions Network, under the leadership of Dr. Jeffrey Sachs, SPA convener, Ms. Emma Torres, SPA strategic coordinator, and Dr. Carlos Nobre and Dr. Marielos Peña-Claros, the SPA co-chairs. The panel is currently composed of 300 leading scientists from around the world, 72% from Amazonian countries, 42% who are female, and 14 indigenous scientists. Our mission is to synthesize and communicate scientific knowledge about the Amazon, integrated with indigenous and local knowledge, to accelerate solutions for sustainable and equitable development. Next slide. Since our establishment, the SPA has developed various publications to inform science-based decision-making across the region. These include more than 17 policy briefs and 8 statements on emerging priority themes that are launched at key policy fora, like the climate and biodiversity COPs. This also includes our flagship 2021 Amazon Assessment Report, known as the Encyclopedia of the Amazon. This initial publication of the SPA of over 1,000 pages is unprecedented in its scientific and geographic scope, transparency, and inclusion of indigenous scientists. The report consists of 3 parts, including part 3 on the solution space, which is the focus of this new webinar series. Last year, the SPA launched its first massive open online course, or MOOC, featuring our expert scientists from across the region. The course summarizes all of the key findings of our 2021 report in dynamic, engaging, short videos and activities, and the course is available for free in all 3 languages. We invite you to enroll today to learn more and also to dive more deeply into the topics that we will be discussing in this session. Next slide. Now I have the pleasure to introduce 4 of our panelists today, who are members of the SPA's inaugural Youth Advisory Committee. Formally launched in September of 2024, the Youth Advisory Committee works to support the SPA in promoting engagement of young people in both science and policy to advance conservation and sustainable development initiatives in the Amazon region. We are so excited to have Felipe, Pedro, Nora, and Joao here with us today to participate in the first of these several intergenerational dialogues on the science and solutions needed to conserve the Amazon. Today, we will focus on the first 2 chapters of part 3 of our 2021 report, chapter 25 on the Living Amazon Vision, and chapter 26 on the Sustainable Development Goals in the region. Felipe Storch de Oliveira is a Master of Environmental Management candidate at the Yale School of the Environment, specializing in environmental policy analysis and ecosystem management and conservation. He recently worked with the G20 coordination team at Brazil's Ministry of Environment and Climate Change, and is currently co-chair of the Yale chapter of the International Society of Tropical Foresters. Welcome, Felipe. Pedro Neves de Castro has a master's degree in development planning from the Federal University of Pará. His research focuses on development ontologies, regional development, and the history of developmental thought with a focus on the Amazon region. Currently, he is the Secretary General of the Workers' Party of Belém and a regional coordinator of the Brazilian Association of Economists for Democracy, where he also coordinates its COP30 monitoring working group. Welcome, Pedro. Nora Alejandra Quigantar is a young indigenous woman from Colombia. She has a degree in biology and extensive experience in biodiversity and gender issues. Currently, she supports various community processes with women. In addition, she's an international gender champion and a member of Tejiendo Pensamiento, a grassroots organization that promotes the defense of the rights of indigenous women and girls in the field of climate justice. Welcome, Nora. João Pedro Braga is a Brazilian economist currently undertaking their PhD studies at the University College London, researching the financial drivers of deforestation to redirect finance towards a just transition in the Brazilian Amazon. Welcome, João. We are also joined by three of our incredible SPA scientists and lead authors who will be introduced shortly by our youth members. Our scientists will share a brief presentation on each chapter, which will then be followed by brief reflections. Then we will have a roundtable discussion with all of our panelists, followed by a live audience question and answer session, and opportunities to get involved and connect with the panel for future activities. Now I will hand it over to Felipe.
Thank you, Julie. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone that's here with us. I'm excited to start the introduction of a very important researcher that is here with us. Maybe next slide, please. I don't think I have control of the slides. Thank you. I'd like to introduce Amy Alencar. Dr. Amy Alencar is Director of Science of IBAMA, the research Amazon Environmental Research Institute. She went to Federal University of Pará for geography and environmental information system geography by Boston University here in the United States, and has a doctorate in resources and conservation by University of Florida in the United States. Main research theme has been the impact of climate change, fragmentation of deforestation caused by deforestation, and fires that happen in the Brazilian Amazon. Also studying other themes, including the evaluation of loss of forests. And welcome, teacher, professor. And pass it on to Pedro. Hello, everyone. Good morning. I'm excited to be here. It's my pleasure to be here and to participate in this presentation. I'd like to introduce Dr. Simone Ataide. She is a leader of integrity and research in the World Resources WE, where she promotes a culture of excellence in research and ensures production of high quality science. Before getting into WFE, she was an environmental anthropology teacher in the Florida University, and her research encompasses interdisciplinary fields and transdisciplinary, integrating indigenous knowledge, conservation of biodiversity, sustainable development, and environmental justice, especially in the Amazon region. Graduated in biology and a master's degree in botanics by Paraná Federal University, botanics by the Kent University, and a doctorate in ecology, interdisciplinary ecology with concentration in anthropology by the University of Florida. Her work was recognized by several awards, reflecting main contributions to environmental science and politics and policies. Thank you, Pedro. For introducing Simone, I'd like now to invite Annie Alencar to do a brief introduction of chapter 25 and to remind colleagues who are here, these chapters are available to read. There are summaries in all three languages, and our SPA colleagues will be sending links throughout the presentation. The leader, author of this chapter, Annie Alencar. Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever you may be, depending on when you're watching this or where you are watching this event. It's my pleasure to be here with you all, with these young leaders of the SPA. We're very happy to have them. And I'll be bringing you let's say, the synthesis, summary of this chapter, which was a challenging chapter. It was a challenging chapter specifically because we were focused on the vision of the scientists of SPA for the Amazon in the upcoming years. So it's a chapter that initiates the chapter block of the part of the summary of the report of 2021 SPA. So it starts up opens up the solutions. My colleague and I, Lillian, which you will get to know soon, we authored, we organized the chapter, and we had several scientists, females. So can we move on to the next one? Before we go into the vision, it represents 20% of the biomass of the planet. 16-20% of fresh water in the ocean comes from this region. Over 400 billion of trees. 13% of the trees in the world, they are recycling. They recycle water in the atmosphere, everything carbon.
Point of view, carbon and the water and biodiversity. It is a super diverse region. Over 22% of plant species of tropical, great part of the species that exist in the Amazon only exists in the Amazon. Next slide, please. But also there is a socio-cultural diversity that is very fundamental, which interacts with this ecological diversity. 60% of the Amazon population is located in the urban centers, but we also have a culture that is very much Amazonian and alive and diverse in rural Amazon. So we have over 410 indigenous groups spread out over the Amazon, 80 of which in voluntary isolation, and a diverse range of languages. We have river shore dwellers that have migrated into other places, but they still keep their culture, and they live harmoniously within the region. And you can't speak of the Amazon, the future of the Amazon, without understanding the marks, the scars that the past has left on the Amazon. So I bring here this map of the Great Amazon Biome. They demonstrate how the Amazon is today, or the greater part of the Amazon. It's still conservated. So there's, especially the macro view, is still very much conservated, even if the Cerrado is closing in. So, but a lot of the native vegetation of the Amazon is still up, and even though a great part of this native vegetation is already suffering degradation, And we also have had a loss over 40 years of a very accelerated loss of vegetation. If we count how much of the Amazon has been converted into grasslands. And so we have, even though much is still standing, you have already lost much. And here, then, we come into the vision. So the Amazon's past has showed a very fast loss of native vegetation, but we also have here besides the rapid loss, we also have an occupation of a monocultural occupation of the use of the land, which is grazing. So these are the marks we have today. So we have large-scale economic exploitation is still in the region, but they have not advanced as quickly as cattle. So because we have been able to stop the soybean advance, the monoculture, but in order to work these things, to work on the visions to the Amazon, we need to understand the interconnections, global interconnections that have brought the Amazon to where it is today, which are the players, the social players that we see as key to the Amazon, what is being thought in the Amazon, and what are the worldviews related to these interconnections of the Amazonian players. And so we came here to this to these values and principles of the science panel. So, and these principles and values are fundamental for taking the Amazon to a limit, or to make the Amazon really thrive as a living being. So for us to go to the limit, we have economic regimes which are unsustainable, based on extractivism and cattle grazing, and the policy institutions, they are weak to conserve the Amazon, that cannot make the governance be felt, and they cannot make the governance be enforced. So in the decision-making process, the voice of certain sectors, of powerful sectors, are being forced. So then we have a violation of rights. We have of the indigenous communities, the illegal extractivism, and as a consequence, we lose green areas. There's degradation. There's pollution, deforestation, pollution systems that are unsustainable. So in the interaction between the human being and nature, we could do different. We could do things differently if we look as in yes, the Amazon is biodiverse. It has its own social biodiversity. So why not invest in it as a value? So this is domain of the sustainable economics, the investments in restoration and conservation of those areas. So we need to have empowered indigenous peoples in the Amazon, so that they can complement and support public policies in the decision-making process, to take part in them, and a powerful change. That's what we need. And in the new social economy, we need to reduce deforestation, degradation to zero, and to improve the well-being of the environment as a whole, and to combat systemic injustices in a way that we value and adapt the peoples living there. So as I told you, we try to understand Amazon's past. So here's just an example. It's in the chapter, there's something much more detailed. And for us to get to this point, There was a lot of help from Susanna because she, so she brought a lot of insights that helped us single down how the Amazon has been viewed in the past since the periods of the empire until today, and how the Amazon is being established as an environmental system, and how the very idea of it has been establishing itself as a value. And also, for us to understand this process, we must understand who who lives in the Amazon, who acts, who makes decisions about the Amazon, who rules, who lives there, who interacts there. And then we have the government organizations, NGOs, scientific organizations, NGOs of several kinds, from brew production and environmentalists to social organizations. We have the actual dwellers of the Amazon, the indigenous peoples, the local communities, the ones who live in the cities, the small producers, the mid-size and large-size farmers. So anyone who is already well established there. So there are also the external factors, which are private companies, investors, multilateral agencies, and all this must interact and understand each other so that we can get a living Amazon. So, which is the name of our vision. That's the vision we want and have. It's like a living Amazon. Integrity of ecosystem, improvements on social justice and economic inequalities. And I think my time is up, or is almost up, but it's interesting to perceive all these things of values and principles of the living Amazon. And I'm not gonna go through all of them. So I'm just gonna ask for the next slide.
You still have 5 more minutes.
You can
We can
go
keep
on
the
for
questions.
the next 5 minutes.
You can save the
It's no
questions for
problem.
later. It's not an issue.
Okay. So so then yeah, let's leave up the principles and values. So we understand that the Amazon is a being, a world heritage, due to its biodiversity, because it's unique and complex, so it deserves to be there just by being that. So just by being that, it deserves its own place, a world heritage to be preserved and valued. It offers ecosystemic functions that are essential. The people who live there, they have strategies of subsistence that are diverse and different, precisely because they have learned to live and adapt to the environment of Amazon, which is biodiverse. The Amazon also has a lot of different worldviews, a lot of governance systems. And this can be an asset, a good thing, to contribute to really form solutions that are diverse and democratic. The Amazon is also possesses a high level of cultural linguistic diversity, because in that also provides the possibility for us to understand the biodiversity and cultural diversity as something to be valued and to contribute in the construction of our vision of a living Amazon. And finally, the recognition of territorial rights of indigenous peoples and local communities as a way to reduce conflicts, to promote justice, environmental justice, and territorial justice, and also the promotion of rights of those communities. So these are the values and principles that have guided the construction of this chapter, the aspects of our vision. And then we divided all this into 3 groups. One group focused on conservation and restoration of ecosystems, of the integrity of and diversity, ecological diversity. Another group focused on solutions of the bioeconomy, which takes into account the welfare of the communities. And the other group focused on the empowerment of peoples and governance, links to the questions of rights and social justice. So these sort of followed the following chapters, provided the basis for the following chapter. So this connects with what is going to be spoken about. So in the SPA report. And then we came up with this mandala, the Living Amazon Mandala. It was created based on the recommendations of each chapter. So we've had a few workshops to try to adequate the recommendations and put them up on the mandala. And they focus on these 3 points. One is the measures of conservation and restoration, and the other one focus on sustainable development and bioeconomy, and the third one in the strengthening of Amazon citizenship and governance. So we can go on to the next slide. And then we came up with this tree of solutions for the Living Amazon, and which is the vision of the SPA with these 3 components. And we added the elements on the roots to like participation and social engagement for the conservation, restoration, and then incentives for restoration based on market economy, on policies, and payment for environmental services, effective policies, for instance, for strong participative governance. We wanted inclusive processes in the decision-making process, equity policies, justice and rights, among others. In bioeconomy, we added a diversified economy, social responsibility of the markets, corporate responsibility, accountability, and responsive consumption. And of course, all this have a basis, which is the capacity of institutional adaptation, education, creation of competencies and entrepreneurship, and transparency and responsibility. And all this will lead to a living Amazon, which then will generate the leaves. So the leaves, we see a better way of subsistence and social welfare, more development of science and knowledge, more ecological integrity of the ecosystems, a healthier environment, a conservation restoration economies, green urban economies, market equity. Then, among other things, those are the leaves of the tree, and so what the system would generate. And I think that's it. Then we go back the total diagram, and then I'll stop here.
I'll stop here, and it's very difficult to build a vision for the Amazon when we don't incorporate these elements. We don't incorporate what the role that the international market plays onto the Amazon, globalization over the Amazon, what each stakeholder thinks about the Amazon and the trajectories and the past of the Amazon. This is going to be fundamental for us to make decisions whether we want the Amazon and the limit or if we want live Amazon. That's all. Thank y'all. Thank you so much, Anne and Julie. There's a great class regarding the lessons of how the past of the Amazon molds the present of the live Amazon, and also how the today's live Amazon is also. Whenever we read the report, we have a vision, and when we are able to listen the specialist that's talking, it's very important, this dialogue. So I just want to thank you all.
I will be speaking in Spanish. I think it's probably easier, when I'm going to have my conversation with Nora and Lillian. So I'll do that. And I'll also introduce to you Lillian Painter. She's the country director and senior conservationist in Bolivia. And she also has several degrees from the University of Liverpool as of 2005. And she has also worked in the articulation of efforts to achieve concrete benefits both for nature as well as people. She is a lead author in the Intergovernment Platform for Biodiversity Policies and also in the Scientific Panel for the Amazon. Her experience includes the strategic planning for conservation, for the management of wildlife, and natural resources in the Amazon. Dr. Lillian, you can now begin your presentation. Thank you very much. All right. First of all, it's a great pleasure to participate and to be here. I want to greet everyone in the meeting. So chapter 26 was a chapter that, well, I believe it flows quite naturally and it flows very naturally after Annie's presentation. We worked on this chapter in as much collaboration as possible. And we've included some of our secondary participants listed on screen. Now, this chapter 26 seeks to continue with this vision that was just shared to us by Annie, but to also try to articulate it or to integrate it into a language of sustainable development as we understand it at a global scale, at a worldwide scale. So next one, please. Well, so much like Annie presented it, it was very clear. A vision of resilience, a resilient Amazon for a living Amazon implies a few considerations. Number one, the limits of the Amazon. That is the environmental limits of the Amazon. We mean, of course, maintaining that coverage of 80% of the forests, and as well as the fluvial and water connectivity. That also means that we place the sustainable development agenda within these environmental limits. While at the same time, it is necessary to preserve and safeguard the rights of indigenous peoples and local communities, to invest in science and technology, but also while maintaining conversation with local knowledge and inclusive systems of knowledge that make use and preserve this incredible natural and human heritage in the region. And finally, to promote a multi-level governance starting from the local level up until a national level, and hence, therefore, articulate at a whole geographic basin level. So, what are the main goals for sustainable development? Well, these SDG Sustainable Development Goals are a group of 17 worldwide goals adopted by UN member countries in 2015 as a part of the 2030 agenda for sustainable development. And it seeks to end poverty, to protect the planet, and to ensure the well-being of all persons without leaving anyone behind. They are designed to approach the main social, political, and environmental issues in a holistic and integral way. Now, these objectives can be clustered into or grouped into 5 dimensions. Now, as per this chapter, and also following this vision of a living Amazon, 4 of these dimensions, people, prosperity, peace, and partnerships, within the Amazon basin limits. So, in summary, all of the objectives that are connected to the planet are put here inside a large circle. And these objectives cannot exceed the basin circle because, of course, these limits define and set the feasibility for the strategies and the actions in the Amazonian basins, including all the animals and human beings found within them. And this vision to respect the environmental limits of the Amazonian basin is a most pressing alternative, considering the trends that we are observing within the region and facing the environmental impact that we are seeing more of every day. Next one, please. So, this dimension, this people dimension involves SDGs that include ending poverty, zero hunger, health and well-being, quality education, and gender equality. So in the smaller maps that you see on the left part of the screen, we have two main columns, right? On the left, you see trends, and on the right, you see performance. Now, considering the time at which the chapter was written, was redacted, and includes data up until 2019. On the right, we see to what degree or to what point these SDGs have been achieved or complied with. And all of these objectives of zero hunger, zero poverty, etc. Some of them are in red and orange. Some of them are in in yellow, sorry. And when we look at the trends, we don't really see anyone in green, except in the case of Peru for the development of the fourth SDG, quality education. So what we can say here is that at that point there was considerable delay, and by moderate we mean orange on the right column, and red meaning that the performance is significant in the case of all the countries within the basins. This applies to all countries in the Amazon for the persons dimension. This is compared to global performance. Now, when we look at the trends column, we don't see an adequate progress in order to achieve the compliance with these objectives until 2030. Clearly, the pandemic, I mean, at the time we did not have the data, but the pandemic has shown us that, has exposed the weaknesses in the system, and certainly the situation has worsened in many cases. And in fact, we've seen regressions in much of our progress when it comes to reducing poverty. We've been seeing regression as much as 12 years, my apologies. And that also applies for extreme poverty numbers. Now, sorry, I'm gonna have to plug in my computer. Sorry, I did not notice that it was not plugged. Sorry. My apologies. So, in terms of, now when it comes to the health dimension, even though the population here is relatively young, in both Latin America and the Caribbean, we see data from the second highest cumulative mortality rate in the world, resulting from the COVID-19 pandemic. This highlights the fact that our health system, our public health systems, are severely limited or have plenty of limitations and high levels of inequality. For example, in the case of the COVID-related deaths among indigenous peoples in Brazil, they suffered anywhere between 136% and 110% of higher death rates compared to the national average. Notwithstanding that these populations are found in very isolated regions where surely the numbers are undercounted. And also when it comes to gender equality, the pandemic, the pandemic also highlighted the vulnerabilities in this regard, given that women were faced with greater workload, domestic world or household workload, and an increase in violence, of domestic violence. Also, access to family planning methods and the increase in unexpected pregnancies and lack of sex education severely affected teenage women, especially. Thank you. Next. On the case of objectives related to the planet, we have number 1, clean water and sanitation, responsible production and consumption, climate action, and terrestrial ecosystem life. Now, when it comes to the trends in the dimension of clean water and sanitation, we see that Colombia, Ecuador, and Brazil showed a trend to at the moment, their trend was towards compliance in 2030. However, in climate action, many countries are somewhat green. However, climate action indicators, in the case of sustainable development measures, they're measured with carbon emission indicators, which are not really associated to deforestation associated emissions. So this refers more to emissions due to construction projects, infrastructure projects, etc. So yes, we also see that even though at a national level, as we were saying, both all three, Brazil, Colombia, and Ecuador, are showing a trend towards improving access to clean water and sanitation services. At a national level, this trend is not really reflected throughout the Amazon region in those countries. So, for example, in the Brazilian Amazon, by 2018, only 50% of the population had access to clean water, and only 15% had a sewage system available to them. This is something that is also observed in all of our countries, and many populations in the Amazon often show these deficiencies. Now, that's of course a paradoxical, because this is the largest hydrographic basin in the world, and yet the people who live there do not have access to clean water. In fact, 89% of people living in the Peruvian Amazon, for example, do not have, or rather did not have, access to clean water by 2020. And in 2018, 38% of households in the Amazon state in Brazil did not have a household connection to a running water system. In the Amazon estuary, less than 9% of homes have direct access to sewage systems. This does not consider the fact that the populations without access to clean water or to water supplies are also suffering of a decrease in both quality and quantity of water due to droughts and climate change effects. And they're also being affected in the water quality, mainly because of dumping of residue from and waste from urban centers, and more every day, the issue of the use of mercury because of the mining activity, especially in the high basin countries. So, the issue of climate change does not currently consider deforestation, and it is at a critical point. We have a very high risk of a very high risk of fires, of drought, and we are already at the tipping point for the Amazon, of the transformation of forests in the Amazon into savannas, especially in the southwest of the basin. Next, please. Now, in the prosperity category, we have accessible energy, decent work, industry, innovation infrastructure, decrease in inequality, sustainable cities and communities. Here we uphold the fact that we have seen significant increases as of the decade of 1990 in most countries. When it comes to access to power and energy, both in urban areas and rural areas. In terms of trends, most countries are showing a trend towards meeting this goal. However, that is not the case of all countries. For example, we see the case of Bolivia. Also, something that is worth highlighting is that in this indicator, we do not consider all the trade-offs. We do not consider the cost-benefit ratio between some of the power generating projects, such as hydroelectric plants, and how these contribute to emissions caused by lack of forest and lack of forest coverage, and how these can also affect ecosystems, water, connectivity, and, for example, local fisheries, affecting the well-being of communities. Also, in this category of prosperity, the current model, as Anne was stating in the previous chapter, economic prosperity in the Amazon comes from unsustainable extractivist activities in the Amazon. And that includes logging and mining. So of course, there we have to highlight once again the limitations of the environmental limitations. And so yes, the development of a local bioeconomy and the innovation with equality in mind is of paramount importance. During the pandemic, we once again saw the fragility of the provision of dignified work within the Amazon basin, as well as the great amount of workers exposed to informal work, especially in the rural area, and more especially in the case of the youth and women. Next, please. Lillian, sorry for interrupting. We have 2 more minutes, okay? Thank you. When it comes to peace, this is one of the SDGs, this is one of the goals that has a much more critical status and has also been decreasing at an alarming rate. This is the data up until 2019, but in all of our countries, we are seeing more and more, greater impact due to criminal activity from organized crime, the impact of loss of security, and the loss of the state presence, that is a state of rights. This has to do with, again, drug trafficking activities, illegal mining, gold mining, human trafficking, wildlife trafficking, especially close to the borders. Peace in the Amazon will not be possible without environmental protection and upholding of indigenous rights. Many of the current crimes, much of organized crime activity in the Amazon is connected to environmentally irresponsible or outright harmful activities in the Amazon. Now, the next objective is partnerships. Here we see that there is a commitment from governments to invest in sustainable development. And something that we need to highlight is that even though there is some increase in funding for conservation activities, these are nowhere near what is necessary, and is nowhere near the level of investment promoted by deforestation and the unsustainable use of natural resources. Between 2013 and 2015, approximately $2.7 billion were invested in environmental protection. But in between 2015 and 2020, only only European, $20 million were invested only from European institutions. So yes, there is no coherent investing plan, and Conservancy is not supported as it should. So the clearest messages, and the last one, please. Thank you. So we continue to move towards an unsustainable road. There are several tensions between the different SDGs that we're trying to comply with, but they may be addressed. We may reduce them if we consider multi-scale perspective and we consider the local situation as well as the effect of several different policies to promote progress and breakthroughs at a national level. Also considering the impact at a local level, and also the equality and the equity and equality between these goals. And of course, upholding the rights of indigenous peoples and local communities is fundamental. It's essential in order to consolidate any progress in sustainable development goals. So it comes back to coherence and objectives of reduction in climate action. And yes, the 2030 agenda was something very important to consider. And finally, the 2019 crisis exposed a series of weaknesses in our systems, in our systems and structures in order to support sustainable development in the Amazon. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Aime and Lilian, for these insightful presentations. Now we will start our roundtable discussion across both chapters. So if we can have all of our youth members and our scientists turn on their cameras for our panel discussion, that would be great. And Daniel, you can remove the slides when you have a chance. Great. Thank you, everyone. I'm going to ask you all a few questions about some of the key themes that are highlighted across both of the chapters, which are the focus of our session today. Each of these questions will be directed to one youth member and one scientist so that we can hear the perspectives from both generations on all of these important topics. So starting with our first question for Joao and for Lilian, in your perspective, which SDGs are key to help unlock progress in the other SDGs to help achieve the Living Amazon vision, especially in the Amazon, a region which is so rich in biodiversity?
Sure, I can start and then I can kick it off to Lilian. So what I thought was very interesting in Lilian's presentation was the fact that, in fact, yes, Amazonian countries do have cooperation mechanisms in place, but the Amazon regions are the most vulnerable in between the countries, not only from a social perspective, but also environmentally. So this inconsistency between geologic wealth and sociocultural wealth is very evident, and it's very material. And for the last part on partnerships and trends towards cooperations, I think that is also very important to consider to achieve SDG number 17 on cooperation. SDG 17 basically has 9 sub-objectives and 9 annexations, which speak of innovation, financing, investment, but also other things like global trade. So I think that objective 17, this goal 17 on partnerships and cooperation are critical, not just to unblock all other forms of cooperations to benefit other goals, but also to understand how these countries have had some breakthroughs at a region, right? And how they promote this vision of a living Amazon as a single biome. And finally, also very interesting to highlight is that the SDGs have progressed. It's good, but not great. We have 5 more years, and we see that the Amazon is actually going closer to the point of no return. So yes, I suppose I look, the challenge is enormous, but this vision of living Amazon, as you've shared in these chapters, it will help to solve it, but we need more. Lilian, would you like to complement that? Sure. So to follow up on your own line, Joao, I would only add the issue of education to that. Yes, a quality education to make it so that we have a greater capacities to develop more innovation centers in the Amazon and building bridges towards cooperation with researchers and innovators coming from indigenous communities. Also, looking for also furthering the interests of a bioeconomy, but again, it has to be an equitable bioeconomy and also a bioeconomy that is based on the respect for the limits of the Amazon. And finally, I would like to highlight the topic of the struggle against organized crime and the need to strengthen our capacities to fight corruption in our own countries. I believe that the issue of peace and the issue of peace and capacity building, I mean, this can turn the tables around and they can do it very quickly. And I think that is also a huge challenge for all the countries. And to do some effective work in that line of thought, we need to work not just with authorities, but we also need to work and strengthen capabilities, local capabilities of the communities and indigenous territories. Local governments have to be able to act in a way that is more informed and with strategies that should not be based just on command and control, but to strengthening control and territorial monitoring in their spaces. Thank you.
Thank you, Lilian. Thank you, Joao. This next related question to the last point Lilian shared is for Nora and for Simone. What strategies can include youth, women, and local scientists to help advance SDG progress in the Amazon, especially in access to education, to health, and political participation? Nora, would you like to start?
Absolutely. So yes, thank you very much for the space, and it's wonderful to be here. Okay, so I think that in order to further SDGs in the Amazon, we need to think about education and promote the community learning networks. I would think that methodologies adapted to the Amazonian context are most useful because it holds not only academic knowledge, but also it includes the local people's knowledge and the systems of knowledge and of the indigenous peoples. Health is a very important dimension. Strengthening intercultural medicine and strengthening the knowledge, for example, of local plants that can also ensure and safeguard ancestral knowledge from indigenous peoples. So a clear example for that is the intercultural indigenous health system, the CISPI in Spanish. That's a traditional health system for indigenous peoples in Colombia. It uses medicinal plants and spirituality as a method for healing. And we also have a fundamental role as youth, and that is also to continue with the legacy of our elders and also involve each other in community health practices. This is generating brigades for joint collaboration with the community, so on and so forth. Now, another critical point, and something that is also very important, is the issue of water contamination. And that is to build up scientists, which we find within the communities in order to monitor the quality of water in the rivers using basic tools and educating new scientists who are found within those territories. Another important point is in the issue of gender equality. We are at a critical year where we're going to see many milestones, and there are opportunities to raise awareness and promote and support peace promoting women. This will be the anniversary of the ECOSOC forum, of the resolution from 2000. All of these spaces are important to promote the participation of young women and to have an effect on decision makers to promote protection and leadership actions in women. For example, in the regional 60th Summit for Women, there was a call done to advance gender equality and ensure full participation of young women in the creation and implementation of climate policies that is inclusive with specific mechanisms to environmental defenders and community leaders. And today, it is one of the most important concerns that financing is not really geared towards gender equality advancement. Only 0.035% of official assistance funds for development in 2021 had anything to do with gender and climate security. So one of these actions, one of these strategies that require us as youth and as women to advance is to generate data, and breaking all that data that allows us to make decisions, better decisions, and for people who are developing policy regarding the last loss of biodiversity in the Amazon. Constant support for local community endeavors and the building of peace from the territories, and including the resource availability, is absolutely essential. And it is a pressing matter. It is urgent to increase financing because it has a cross-cutting effect between gender equality and climate security, so that it reaches youth and women's organizations directly. I would just like to end by saying that joint work between the youth, women, and local scientists not only support a living Amazon, but it also promotes sustainable development that is respectful of biodiversity and the diversity of people who live in the Amazon.
Thank you, Nora. Anything to add, Simone, to Nora's comments?
Thank you so much, Nora, and thank you everyone for being here today. I'd like to offer some reflections regarding this question formulated by Julie, and to supplement what Nora already focused on with much relevance, her observations from the territories, especially from where the indigenous peoples, the communities are working or protecting their territories, their resources, ecosystems, and also this huge cultural diversity, difference in languages and worldviews that are represented in the Amazon, which is a huge diversity that we have, cultural and biological diversity. So I think that when we think about ODS, and how we may have a greater participation of the politicians and the youth and women in relation to the implementation of these ODSs in the Amazon, it's important that we may think about the interconnections between the ODSs. And when we think about education, quality education, there's no way to dissociate that from science and technology, inclusive science and technology, open science, science more geared towards the Amazon, but that it may be built from starting the diversity of the culture and diversity in languages spoken in the Amazon. This dialogue between science, academic science, or this model that's more Western knowledge, and the indigenous knowledge, local knowledge, it would be fundamental. It would be fundamental to have this dialogue so that we can get to this point of well-being models or values or principles that we spoke about in chapter 25 that will take us to this well-being, the health, taking into consideration other ways of considering what is well-being, human well-being in harmony with nature, which would be this notion of bon vivre, which is in with indigenous knowledge, thinking about ODS 3, 4, and 5, which would be health, well-being. How can we conceptualize thinking about the unique concept of health, which is human health and environmental health, bringing the knowledge of medicinal plants and local systems of health, giving value and connecting with systems of public health, systems related to scientific understanding regarding health, the issue of quality education. It's not just to educate and give capacity to the locals, but also to educate the scientists and our youth that are in the cities, so that there really is a greater collectivity and Amazonic citizenship, which we are seeking and we speak about in both chapters. I'm already actually mixing both chapters actually. And finally, I'd like to give emphasis to the commentary that was done in relation to the partnerships and collaborations with this 17. I believe these partnerships are fundamental for the Amazon because there is an inequality. To reduce the inequality, which is another goal, it would be something that we have to recognize and address and work so that we may diminish the inequality that is existing regarding access to knowledge and technology among the Amazon countries. So this vision for the Amazon will be very important regarding this vision of the live Amazon, is the Amazon biome. We're going to go beyond geopolitical borders and logistics. We're going to work together in these great networks of equality. I believe they have much strength. We can think about indigenous networks, the SPA role, and other instructions, and that may try to work, get the Amazon to be connected for a live Amazon. These are my initial comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Simone, and thank you, Nora. These are all part of our collective, right, Living Amazon vision for the Amazon we want. And of course, accomplishing all of these objectives requires resources, it requires finances, right? So for this next question, for Felipe and Anne, related to this point, the Brazilian government is discussing new financial flows for conservation, such as the Tropical Forest Forever facility, right, which will be launched at COP30 in Belém this year. Based on the experiences described in Chapter 25, like the REDD+ program, for example, what role can science play to help inform the design of these important financial instruments to achieve the Amazon we want and the Living Amazon vision? Maybe I'll hand it over to Felipe first, and then Anne can provide her comments as well.
This question is very important, a year that we are getting ready for the first time to receive a convention regarding the climatic parts in the COP30 in the Amazon, in the city of the Amazon, so that we are younger may engage more. I believe that science already has a role that is a formative process for us to understand how would these resources utilized, allocated, distributed. People spoke about the importance of indigenous peoples and direct resources, which is a little bit of the discussion in the chapter. The chapter also mentions, when it speaks about REDD+, is through the implementation of in Brazil, that is the Amazon Fund. I believe science has two roles. The first one is that when we see large figures and numbers with the FFF that Julie mentioned for this initiative, financing initiative for tropical forests, it's a large volume. It may confuse people regarding the resource. And science, social sciences, which I believe are important, can also help many groups have participation in this governance, shared governance. There's throughout several consulting projects and the design of an initiative which may be more balanced, considering all the discussions we had in Chapter 25 about the historical inequalities that the Amazon region has experienced. Another question I believe that I'd like to actually hear Anne's take regarding this is that science may contribute to this discussion regarding financing and financial instruments. In the Amazon, for example, we speak a lot about deforestation. We have to stop deforestation. We have to stop illegal deforestation. I believe all of us that are here from other countries, I see colleagues from Bolivia, Peru, via chat, we hear lots about deforestation, but what we have seen more and more in the news is the effect of climatic events, extreme climatic events, the impact that this has in our day-to-day in the region, and also the importance of the degradation of the forest. So that we may, looking at one example, for example, the state of Mato Grosso in Brazil, we have forest coverage of 57% plus within the state, but maybe the degradation of the forest, for example, a situation where they had recent fires or a series of ecological degradations that could be taking place, this amount could get down to 38%. When we have a degraded forest, we can speak about it is a forest with a lower capacity of supplying um, assets, services, water, for our food. So science, chapter 25, also as a report that is more general of the scientific panel, that it showed us that we have to focus on certain things that might be featured in the news, such as deforestation, but we also may have an elaborate vision, a holistic vision of the Amazon, where we may design financial instruments, thinking, for example, the issue of environmental degradation and the participation of the local communities, indigenous communities. So I move it on, pass it on to Annie and Julie. Like to hear some about regarding the answer to this. Thank you, Felipe. I believe you brought up some very relevant things, but an answer, there's no simple answer or quick answer. Actually, in summary, there's no way to advance with any discussion processes regarding alternatives for the Amazon if we don't have science. So for sure, science is what's feeding the numbers of how much of the forest has been impacted by fire, was exacerbated due to extreme drought, who are the peoples who are reached the most. With science that shows when the year is going to be when there's going to be one event, 2 or 3 extreme climate events, and how can we prepare for this? And regarding this context of science, we are also speaking of science practiced in a more empirical manner by the peoples, indigenous peoples, traditional people, regarding that may be able to observe these processes that may affect their day-to-day, and to pass on solutions that to deal with these processes. So science is fundamental, and in this specific case, for example, solutions, mechanisms, which will, for the carbon and for the services, social cultural services, we need to have a dimension of how viable is this, and science is the one that's going to grant us this. So we, for example, of IBAN, an institute which I'm a part of, we helped along WCES make these first calculations with the FFF, showing, depending on where we were putting the ruler, we would be able to see how many countries were coming in, what's the quantity of resources that were going to be necessary. So regarding this, all the advances that have taken place to understand these processes and to draw mechanisms and to have innovations, what's regarding solutions, it advances in the scope of science. But it looks like there's a gap, a very large gap between these knowledges which are produced with decision making. And I think we need to advance in this to reduce this gap.
How to make an advancement in the bridging of this gap by having more advocacy, by informing society. And the role of the youth here is big. Young people like yourselves, it's your role here is fundamental in this whole process of bridging the gap. We then empower society to really make pressure for the changes that are needed and to place us the right path. So, and the more we press on a scientific approach to decision making, the closer we get to our goals. And just as science is trying to come closer to the more empirical science of the indigenous communities, because they do have very much a holistic grasp of things of life, and Western science has lost that over time.
Sorry, we will be talking
Yeah.
a little bit more about that point. Thank you very much, Anne, and thank you, Felipe, for your comments. Thank you for your comments on that question. I will now go to the last question, and I promise we will go back to some of the points that you just raised, Anne, on empirical science as well as local knowledge and indigenous knowledge.
Oh, let me switch back to English. Apologies to our interpreters. Before we go to our live Q&A with the audience, our last question for this roundtable discussion is for Pedro, and also for any one of our scientists who are participating in the session. Maybe Simone, if you're still with us, we'd love to hear your thoughts on this question as well. Both chapters highlight the importance of cities and urban areas as part of achieving sustainable development in the Amazon. Why is it important for researchers to also examine and work with cities in the Amazon to advance conservation? Can you tell us a little bit, Pedro, from your perspective of why this is so important?
Thank you for the question. I believe this is a question that dialogues a lot with what we have here in mind. There's a symbiotic relationship between urban and rural, both cultural and economic. The Amazonic cities are distribution centers of governance of resources extracted from rural areas, and we must understand how these places work, so that we can form informed policies about the natural resources. But there's something more interesting. There are problems like the decreasing structure of the traditional economies and the subsequent violence, like the great projects like hydroelectrical power plants and agribusiness, monoculture. They undermine perspectives of social reproduction, and basically it lacks respect to the Amazon character, which will look for possible perspectives elsewhere. In Brazil, almost 10% of the young population lives in the Amazon and represents 2/3 of the people in the region. Over 30% of this population live in rural areas. This is over twice the proportion for the whole country. And so a lot of this population, notably the youth, associate themselves with local extractivism and family agriculture. In the state of Pará, which is about 40% of the rural area of the Amazon, Brazilian Amazon, we are talking about a lot of young people that get inserted into sustainable, responsible production, but with the advancement of other ways of understanding the nature and the economy, and ways that are strongly supported by political policies, these young peoples, these new generations, they will migrate to cities. And the urban centers have never really been prepared to receive these people in a proper manner. So that impacts security, impacts violence, impacts the infrastructure network of transportation. But on the other hand, what about the forest and the climate? If you de-articulate the peoples that not only protect the Amazon, but take their lives from it, how do you web the connectivities between the urban and rural that foster the reproduction of the ancient knowledge of the peoples? So, well, we have here something that that in science has been considered and prepared, and I invite you all to reflect on this, if anyone else would like to contribute on this question. So I leave the floor to you. I was going to raise my hand, but I couldn't find the emoji. So I'd like to contribute a little bit to this reflection by Pedro. Thank you, Pedro. I loved what you said, the idea of the interconnectivities, of the focus to rethink the connections between urban and rural, coming from a very academic traditional definition. And nowadays, really, this division is very strained, and we see more and more that this division, this classification, is very much artificial. The connections nowadays are multiple, they're two-way, and they're both big barriers for us to achieve equity and development with equality and justice, and truly sustainable and live in Amazon. But also, they're opportunities, opportunities for us to get to the live in Amazon we want. Why? Because I think nowadays, when we speak of a bioeconomy or sustainable economy, I like to say things in the plural because Amazon is so plural. I always use the plural terms. But in English, we say knowledge. But no, I always use knowledges. Like it's on purpose to emphasize the plurality of the Amazon, the several knowledges and ways of seeing things. So in Portuguese and in Spanish, it's okay to say saberes, but not in English. But anyway, what I wanted to say is that we have an opportunity about connectivity. When we promote new bioeconomies, social economies, and science, technology, innovation, starting from the connectivity between the knowledges with technical knowledge, that's when innovation happens. It only happens with all these connectivities. It happens at the margins. When you have everyone thinking the same, it's harder to come up with innovation. If you get engineers, but when you get engineers and indigenous scientists, you get much more chance of innovation. There are even theories about this. So in the social bioeconomies of the Amazon, I consider it a great opportunity for you to rethink and to address and deal with this connectivities between urban and rural, to connect cities, to look with this integrated vision and adequate policies. Because then we have what's going on in the territories and the means of production and the ways of life, and the climate changes, because knowing only the economy is not biosocial economy. You need to know, you need to take into account the social bioeconomy is not only the financial economy. So we really need to integrate all these strategies in conjunction with society, and we need to renew the way we do science, renew the way we treat and teach the contents at our universities. We really need to strengthen the institutions of research and education, because there's a huge opportunity in the Amazon. But at the same time, we must innovate the systems. We really need to bring the indigenous knowledges on a equal basis, because when we think of changing everything, that's just so vague and that's so hard. But if you start with small projects, little initiatives that start piling up in the Amazon region, those are interesting ways for us to face this artificial division that is urban and rural, because urban and rural are much more connected than we think, which is precisely our theme for the 2025 Amazon report. So later on, I'm going to revisit the recording of this panel today.
Thank you, Simon, and thank you, Pedro. I see we have received really great questions from our question and answer session. Apologies if we don't get to your question today, but please definitely feel free to contact us and send us your question through email. The SPAO Secretariat will get in touch with our panelists and share their responses following our webinar. But I see a lot of the questions are connected, so we'll do our best to answer them together. in this last round of, we'll do a rapid fire question, okay, for our panelists before we move to conclude the webinar. So I think we can all see, right, through these discussions and our presentations, the importance of having a regional vision and regional collaboration to achieve the Living Amazon. So taking into account some of the questions we received in the Q&A, what are some strategic actions that can be taken to ensure we are managing the Amazon basin in an integral way, right? Considering the connectivity between our terrestrial and aquatic ecosystems in the region. So that's one part of that regional question. And part two is, how can transnational governance mechanisms be strengthened, right, to achieve this regional vision and regional collaboration, despite the different tensions we are seeing in geopolitically and different priorities that different countries have. So any thoughts on that two-part question about regional visions and regional collaborations? Joel?
Yeah, thank you, Julie, for summarizing the questions. I think we can narrow down the challenge to our specific positionality within those questions. And as researchers, as young researchers that the YAC members are, we are still in the process of asking the right questions. These questions are being asked today. So I know that, for instance, Criseda has asked a very good question on managing resources and controlling via terrestrial borders, but also intergovernmental collaboration. And I think if these questions are very important to us, we should include them in our research with specific case studies. We should do field work on these regions. We should ask for more experienced scholars, such as the ones that are here today, on how to integrate the very best methods that they have used into these new questions. And I feel that we have a very big role to play in this transformation from a research perspective. From the policy perspective, of course, that's a much more high level aspect, but we can escalate those local case solutions to the higher level. And I think that's what the science panel does very well. That's on the second part. Maybe someone wants to complement?
Any brief additions to this importance of regional collaboration to achieve the Living Amazon vision?
Yeah, I'm just gonna go ahead speaking English, but I also consider that where I grew up in Acre, it's very hard for us to take into account to reduce deforestation and degradation without working in connection with our neighbors in Bolivia and Peru. So in a way, very practical manner, I believe that it is important that we work not considering the national borders, but considering that these ecosystems, they don't mind them. So Amazon specifically, Amazon needs to be thought of as a priority, in face of the governance that we have today, both at a state and federal level, and do the opposite.
Thank you, Felipe. I know we are at the end of our session. We'll just take 2 more minutes to close. This has been such an interesting and dynamic discussion. I know we all wish we didn't have to close it right now. We could talk about these topics for hours if we had the time. But before we do wrap up, I'll use these last 2 minutes we have together to once again give a huge thank you to our amazing panelists who we are so honored to work with through the SPA. The Science Panel for the Amazon is also grateful for the generous support that it receives from the Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation, the Charles Stewart Mott Foundation, and the World Bank, with financial support from the Global Environmental Facility. The Youth Advisory Committee is especially grateful for the generous support provided for its work by the Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation. Lastly, we invite you to join us in our efforts to achieve the Amazon we want. We invite you to follow us on social media to stay up to date on all of our activities, to visit our website to learn more and access all of our resources available in Spanish, English, and Portuguese. Subscribe to our newsletter for future updates. And don't forget to enroll in our massive open online course taught by renowned experts, including Dr. Linian Painter, who's here with us today. And please do stay tuned for other activities from our Youth Advisory Committee that are coming soon. We're really excited to be launching a new podcast in June, which will feature our scientists and also our youth members. And we will also be hosting a national workshop series to convene young leaders and scientists from across the region on the road to COP30. And finally, we invite you to join us for our next webinar of this Science Across Generations series, which is taking place in June. The next webinar in June will focus on conservation and restoration in the Amazon, featuring other SPA scientists and youth members from our advisory committee. More details and registration links will be shared across all of our channels, so we invite you to connect with us and join us for the Amazon we want. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. It was a pleasure to have you, and thank you to our panelists for all of your great discussions and contributions.